Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with Kadyn Proctor. Some very interesting news came out about him. Looks like he might be heading back into the transfer portal, which opens a lot of questions about the future of the transfer portal. Then we're going to get into some different things about the Pac-12, some new developments there. The Pac-12 teams have been giving something of a lifeline, so huge news there. Then we're going to get into some breakout players for 2024 on the defensive side of the ball. We've done this a couple of times before, but now it's time for part 3 because there are so many people that we could get to. And then finally, we have a Hot Take Thursday, and it has everything to do with the coaching world, so definitely stay tuned for that at the very end. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all that we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen or see your comments on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all, because you get to see your questions or comments on the screen, and we get to have a fun back and forth here. So again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. But let's jump right in, because there has been so much stuff happening across the entire country. And one of the things that has happened this week that has kind of set the college football Twitter world on fire has been Kadyn Proctor. He is the offensive tackle that was originally committed to Iowa at the very beginning of recruitment, decided to flip to Alabama late on, played a good amount, or was a transfer over from Iowa in the first place. Excuse me, I apologize for that. But played last year with Alabama, was a huge contributor on the offensive line there, was a big tackle for them. And this offseason, when all of the coaching changes happened and when everything kind of went crazy around Tuscaloosa, they decided that he was going to move back to Iowa and join the Hawkeyes once again. So a very interesting decision there, obviously, but it sounds like he wants to change paths once again. He, all about 2 months into his time at Iowa, has decided he is likely going to leave after the spring practice period, once the spring portal opens, and probably return to Alabama as it seems. So very interesting. There were some rumors that he was on spring break with some of the other Alabama players, so maybe they were in his ear telling him that, Kalen DeBoer and his new staff is actually a very, very good thing and everything's rolling really smoothly. Maybe they were trying to talk him back into coming back to Alabama, and it seems like it worked, because it looks like he will be going back to Tuscaloosa, joining the Crimson Tide once again. And it obviously presents a pretty clear problem with the way that the portal works. And it's not necessarily anything against Kadyn Proctor. I'm all for a kid trying to figure out where he fits best. But there is a slippery slope here that could open up if things like this keep happening. So one of the big things is, obviously, with this, he has been in and out of the portal at least a couple of times in a couple of months. And it's very interesting for a number of reasons, but mainly because it's not really something we've seen in the past. We've always had people that have bounced around maybe year to year, but not a lot of jump in one opening in 1 year and then jump right back out the next opening and go back to the old school. So this is definitely a very new concept, and I think it's something that maybe more players will start to do, and it is utilizing the transfer portal in a way that I don't think it was ever conceived to be used. I think, obviously, there are great things that have come out of the portal. The best things about this sport in a lot of ways, a group of 5 guy getting his chance at one of the big-time schools is always great. A Power 5 guy moving down a level maybe to get some more playing time is great. A kid even just finding his new place in the Power 5 or group of 5 that just makes him happier and has him in a better headspace is all great. The problem comes when it's used kind of willy-nilly. It's used in whatever fashion the players see fit, and it's used kind of as a go-between in between seasons. It's not necessarily about picking a team the first time you do. It's about essentially free agency. So being a free agent for as long as possible and while Kadyn Proctor is more within his power to do whatever he wants with his future, and that's kind of the way the transfer portal is set up right now. It does create an issue because I talked about this earlier this week, or maybe even into last week, but player power in this sport is a huge topic of conversation. It's something that is super important. We have to be able to empower the players to make a little bit of NIL money, be able to transfer, do all the things that they should have the power to do, and make decisions over the future of their, collegiate career, or maybe even their pro career in the long run. But at the end of the day, the portal should be used for one-way movements. It should be used when a kid really feels like he needs to find a new place to play, and he jumps to another school and stays there at least for a year. But when it's being used as kind of, the best way I can kind of describe it is just putting your name into a free agency pool and kind of just letting things happen as they may, it becomes a little bit more dangerous. And it goes back to the thing that I said earlier, where the transfer portal, NIL, or any of the problems that are plaguing college football right now, all of those things with a crystalline and known structure, I think, are good things. I think the transfer portal makes a lot of sense if you have a good structure to it. I think NIL is a great thing for college sports if it has a structure to it. But right now, we're kind of dealing with it as kind of the Wild West and allowing a lot of players to have a lot of power, but not necessarily the understanding or the structure to wield that power effectively and wield it for their best interest. Because in this example, obviously, he decided to transfer after Nick Saban retired, and a lot of the coaching staff changed. Scott Huff came in from Washington and then left and went right back to Washington to join the Seahawks. So there was a lot of uncertainty. So I cannot blame him at all for deciding to jump in the portal then. But there is something to be said about, sticking it out at least through spring, figuring out what this new coaching staff has in store, and figuring out if this is the best place for you. Because obviously he didn't feel that way when they first got there. He didn't feel that way when Nick Saban was walking out the door. But maybe he does now. And maybe, when he joins back up, maybe he's going to feel a little foolish for jumping in during spring. So there's all these different consequences that will be coming of this. And my hope is that this moment is not used as something that, should be done by a lot of players. I hope this isn't something that spurs more players to say, okay, if there's a coaching change, I'll jump in the portal, I'll go to a school, but if things start to work out at that old school, then I can always jump back in and roll on back there. Because the reality is, not everyone is Kadyn Proctor. Not everyone is a remarkable offensive tackle that is going to get tons of draft hype and will start pretty much anywhere in the country and all of this stuff. Because there are tons of guys that will likely do this and at the end of the day be sitting in the portal or be at a new school that they're not overly happy at, or try to go back to their old school and they won't have it because that's not necessarily the way you want to do business. So this is obviously a isolated incident right now, and I think Kadyn Proctor, as of right now, has not caused any big problems. He's just, obviously the people in Iowa are less than happy, but at the end of the day, he made his own decision, and it really only affects Iowa and Alabama, and that's all well and good. The problem becomes when other guys follow that lead, or when it becomes a thing that just people do, where every season, when the season ends, you jump in the portal, you see what's out there, and then maybe you jump right back to school. And I know there are some schools that don't really allow that. I think Clemson would be chief among them with the way that Dabo handles the portal. I know Steve Sarkisian has talked about if you jump in the portal, you're pretty much done with Texas. So there are some schools that will not take you back. And I worry that some of these kids are going to view the portal as kind of use at your leisure type of thing instead of a break glass in case of emergency type of thing, because the portal was always there to help student athletes and to let them find where they need to be. But it wasn't necessarily there to just be a, whenever you want to jump on in, and you can spit out at a new school. And if you want to go back in 2 months later, you're more than welcome. I don't think that was ever the intention of it. That was never what they wanted to be executed. But where we've come as a sport and the way that the NCAA's overlooking of the sport has slowly been kind of deteriorized has led to this, and has led to the transfer portal with a lot of openings, with a lot of question marks, and it allows things like this to happen. And I hope that behind the scenes, this, or any of the number of things that we have talked about on this show have triggered stuff in the background to get a crystalline structure in place and get a governing body in place. Because when we look at the sport in 10 years, it could be entirely different. It could be two major conferences, pretty much the AFC and the NFC of the NFL, with, other conferences just kind of scrounging for scraps at the very bottom. So there is that possibility. But there also is the possibility where you have all these incredible people in the halls of college football that, Nick Saban just retired. You have other retired coaches. You have former players. You have tons of people to choose from. And at some point, those people have to get together and put together a real plan for this sport. Because whether it's, Kadyn Proctor or the next guy or, the next 10 guys, someone's going to get hurt by this, the way that this sport is currently working. Someone's going to get hurt by the lack of structure, by the lack of rules and regulations around, especially NIL, but the transfer portal as well, because as we know, they kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways. So it's one of those things that, as of right now, there's not a huge problem necessarily, I wouldn't say. I don't think Kadyn Proctor, ruined the sport by doing what he did, or necessarily did anything wrong, because at the end of the day, he made a decision at one point where a staff was walking out, and if, from my point of view, that fully made sense. Going back to a little bit closer to home, going to a school that you're familiar with, all of that makes sense to me. Jumping back in, it just creates a precedent that I hope does not continue to happen. I hope that people learn from this and they say, oh, well, he obviously should have stuck it out through spring, at least seen what this staff had to offer, and then made his decision. I hope it's not, wow, you can use it willy-nilly, you can use it however you want. That sounds pretty good. So it's one of those things that this particular circumstance, in this particular situation, I don't necessarily have too big of a problem with. I wish that he would have stayed in Tuscaloosa to figure out what the new staff had in store before jumping back to Iowa, so you could, avoid all of this. But at the end of the day, I don't necessarily have a problem with him making the decision to go back to Alabama. I just worry that the precedent that's being set, especially in the transfer portal world, is a little bit dangerous. And this is kind of the quintessential example of that type of change that we've gone under in college football, and the path that we might be going down if we're not careful about the way that we talk to our kids about transfer portal and all of that type of stuff. So Kadyn Proctor, more than in his power to make the decision best for his future. I hope that he gets back to Tuscaloosa and has a great career, because he's a wildly talented player. I just hope that other players don't necessarily follow his lead, I suppose, on this example. So definitely a lot of stuff happening there. I'm sure there will be a couple more mix-ups there, but at the end of the day, it looks like he is heading back to Tuscaloosa, and hopefully he puts his feet in the ground and doesn't move for the rest of his college career, because I know that Tuscaloosa, or Bama fans, would absolutely love to have him there. Pretty much any school would. So more power to him. Happy that he is hopefully going back to a place where he will be happy and, be able to do the things that he wants to do. But I just hope that other players don't follow that lead, I suppose, is the best way I can put it. But we're going to take our first break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the Pac-12, or the Pac-2, if you want to call it that. They got thrown a little bit of a lifeline recently, so we will jump into all of that after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about Kadyn Proctor and some of the craziness going on with his recruitment and especially his transfer portal movement. It has been quite the ride in the last couple of days, but let's jump into the Pac-2 teams and all of the craziness happening there. Actually, before we do that, I apologize. I do want to remind you all that we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen or your comments on the screen, and we could have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, GSMCPodcast.net. It is a great way for you all to see your question on the screen, and also, obviously, for us here at the network to keep doing what we do. Again, that's GSMCPodcast.net. Let's jump in. We have tons of stuff happening around college football playoff, and a lot of stuff has been cut, I guess, is the best way to put it, from this sport. A lot of different things have been skewed one direction, and that direction has always been in the Big Ten and SEC's direction. They have been kind of monopolizing the sport and slowly gaining more power. And the best way that we have seen that kind of play out in real time has been the college football playoff discussions that have happened recently. Obviously, we just had some revenue agreements that just were just agreed to by pretty much everyone in the nation, and in the FBS especially was the really important part of all of this. And it came down to the SEC and the Big Ten getting 29% each of the college football playoff revenue going forward. So a huge chunk of the pie, at least 50% going to those two conferences, and that is insane. It shows where the sport is at. It shows the power that these two conferences and those two people, and Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti, hold in these conversations. And one of the big worries was obviously the ACC and the Big 12 comparative to them, and they did okay. Obviously not necessarily what they wanted, but again, kind of had to fall in line in this type of discussion where two people hold so much power. So the ACC ended up with about 17% of the cut, and then the Big 12 ended up with, I think, 14.5 to 15%. So obviously not nearly as much as the 29 that the SEC and the Big 10 will be taking home, but much more than two of their friends over on the West Coast, because as we know, the Pac-12 has pretty much dissolved before our eyes very quickly. We have 4 schools going to the Big 10, we have 4 schools going to the Big 12, and then we have 2 schools going to the ACC. So tons of things happening in the Pac-12 offices. Obviously, a new commissioner recently that just took over. A lot of things happening, but right now it's just Oregon State and Washington State sitting out there kind of alone in their Pac-2, as we'll call it for the time being. And there was real worry about what payout that they were going to get, because in the grand scheme of things, they don't hold a lot of weight in the future of college football, especially with the upcoming playoff and all of the new discussions. There's not much of a leg to stand on when you only have two teams and you're kind of sitting out there and aren't necessarily even a viable conference when we talk about getting an automatic bid to the playoff. They don't even qualify for that exemption or that requirement for that position. So obviously they did not hold a lot of power in these discussions, but they were able to get a little something out of it. So it looked like for a time that they were going to get about $350,000 a year from the playoff. And obviously that is not nearly as much money as the other schools will get it. We're getting, I believe, the SEC schools were sitting somewhere around $21 million a year. It's quite the gap. There's no two ways about that. But it seems like an amendment has been added to the agreement that is going to get them to make $3.6 million a year until at least 2028. So obviously a huge change in the overall number that they're making, a huge change in the way that these discussions went over the last couple of days. And for the Pac-2, you got to feel great. I mean, it's something that I think all of their fans I know, but I'm sure there were a lot more people, including myself, around the country that really wanted to see these schools as a part of the future of college football, as a big part of it. So I think seeing them at the very least get what I'm calling a life raft for the time being, getting the ability to find where they stand essentially in 2024 and what the best way forward is huge. Being able to at least bring in a little bit of money. You're obviously not going to bring in nearly as much as the Big 12 or the ACC or the SEC and Big 10. That's kind of out of the question at this point, but you can be in the conversation, right? You can at least get yourself a certain chunk of change, be able to take part in these discussions going forward, be a real viable team when coming into these discussions, be a viable product when coming into these discussions, because we've talked about it a lot. The ACC is starting to kind of struggle, and Florida State and Clemson now are suing them, and the ACC just countersued Clemson, which we'll get into tomorrow, and I will break down what tomorrow's show has in store for us a little bit later. But the ACC essentially is floundering a little bit, and they're starting, in my opinion, to look for what the fix is, or at least what the aftermath of all of the changes that are coming looks like for them. And I think one of the biggest things is how are they going to probably backload that conference. I think once Florida State and Clemson figure out their lawsuits, or even maybe before that, we'll have Miami and North Carolina jump into the fray, and then it's just a matter of time until Virginia and North Carolina State and Louisville and Georgia Tech. So this is a very slippery slope that the ACC is heading down, and there are tons of different candidates around the country that could be backfilled into that conference if need be. So obviously a couple of the choices right around their neck of the woods is a ton of Sun Belt schools. Mainly the two that I pointed out are App State and Troy, because they've been big-time players. JMU just joined and would be a great addition. So there are tons right around their neck of the woods. And Oregon State and Washington State are now in a competition with those teams, kind of. They're in a position where they don't really have the ability to garner a lot of power in these discussions. They don't necessarily have the ability to offer a ton of teams and have them immediately accept, because they're not a big conference. They don't have a ton of money coming in. They don't have a ton of viability as a big-time conference right now. So they're essentially fighting for positions in other conferences, or at least fighting for a little bit more power this upcoming season and into 2025. So I think these next 2 years then these next couple of years going into 2028, but especially these next 2 or even 3 years, as the ACC starts to see kind of the effects of all of these cases and everything, and they possibly start to lose some teams, they need replacements, and Oregon State is now battling essentially the App States and the Troys of the world for those positions. And it's going to be huge how these teams perform in these next couple of years, and interesting how, the entire athletic department performs. But as we all know, football is, the straw that stirs the drink around at pretty much every athletic department. So when you talk about the football programs, both these teams are really up against it, and they do have leading guys that I tend to believe in. Oregon State elevated Trent Bray from the DC role after Jonathan Smith, excuse me, it evaded my mind there for a second, but Jonathan Smith moved on to Michigan State. They kept a guy that is familiar with what they do around there, familiar with the university, cares about the university, which is a huge part of this because there's a lot of uncertainty around there. So you need a person that is in there that loves the school, that loves the kids, and wants to be there, because it'd be very easy to find another job, especially if you're someone like Trent Bray who just got a head coaching job. He could have followed Jonathan Smith to Michigan State with no problem, I assume. So obviously a huge decision by Oregon State. He needs to get it rolling pretty quickly. They play Oregon, Purdue, and Cal this upcoming year. So obviously some big games. They do have Washington State at the end of the year in that conference game that they will play. But this team and these two teams really, Jake Dickert, the head coach of Washington State, has been there for quite some time. So two guys that are familiar with their programs, familiar with their schools. Washington State is up against it as well next year. They play Washington, obviously, Texas Tech, and Boise State on their schedule. So it's going to be really tough. There's definitely no layups in these next couple of years, but there are some Mountain West teams on the schedule for these two schools, and that's where they need to absolutely clean up. They need to show that they are still above the crop of the next level, right? If you lose to Oregon, if you lose to Purdue, if you lose to Cal, as Oregon State, not ideal necessarily. You'd love to beat Purdue. You'd love to beat Cal, obviously, because they are one of the teams that was taken over you in some of this realignment stuff. So you'd love to get those wins. But at the end of the day, you just need to show there's still a gap between you, a quote-unquote Power 5 team, and the group of 5 teams. You still need to show that you can beat up on Mountain West teams week in and week out. The same thing with Washington State. They need to show that they are one of the most viable options for conference expansion still out there for the ACC, or even possibly if they play well enough and start to garner enough respect, maybe they can add some Mountain West teams to the Pac-12 and keep that rolling as a probably, a second-tier conference, but at the end of the day, stay alive in all of this craziness, and that's kind of the ultimate goal for Oregon State and Washington State right now. So obviously there is a lot of things that will be happening with these schools over the next couple of years. They have until 2028 before all of that money kind of starts to dry up, and obviously $3.6 million compared to 21 in the SEC and the Big Ten is a little bit different. It's going to be obviously a little bit tougher to make ends meet around there, but at the end of the day, it's about keeping your head above water. It's about keeping yourself above the group of 5 teams, and hopefully in the next 6 months to a year, the ACC comes calling and you can walk into another conference and actually have a little bit of stability. Not to say that the ACC is going to be, a big-time conference going forward, but right now Oregon State and Washington State are kind of just sitting out on an iceberg alone. And at the very least, they need to get to some land and at least be with a group of people and with a group of teams, because it's a real dangerous position that they're in right now, and if they're not careful over the next couple of years, it's a position they could be in for a really long time and possibly even cause some really, really tough decisions to be made around there. So hopefully that doesn't have to happen. I really hope it does not, and I hope that they can have a great 2 years or a great couple of years. The ACC comes calling, they can join in, or they can make the Pac-12 whole again with some Mountain West teams, because I think that would be a really, really fun conference, and although it wouldn't be at the front of the table, it would have a seat at the table, and that's kind of the ultimate goal for these two schools right now. So obviously a lot more to happen there. We will definitely keep you updated on all of the stuff happening around the Pac-12 teams, because it's kind of a confusing point of our sport right now, especially for those two teams. So we'll keep you updated on everything there, but for the time being, we're going to take our second break, and when we come back, we're going to do breakout players for 2024 on the defensive side of the ball. We've done 2 of these already, so definitely go check out those on the YouTube page, but it's time for part 3 because there are so many guys that are set to break out or step into big shoes this upcoming year, so stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the craziness going on with the Pac-12 schools, Oregon State and Washington State, or the Pac-2 if you want to call it that, and some of the new discussions that they've been under with the college football playoff. But now it's time for some breakout players. We have done this before, we have done this a couple of times in fact, but it's time for part 3 because there are tons of guys across the country that either need to step up or expect to step up into big-time roles in 2024. And let's start at Oklahoma and Peyton Bowen, the safety. He is just incredible. Yet last year was a really, really good year for freshman safeties. I think Peyton Bowen is a little bit mad at Caleb Downs for being as good as he was because there would be more people talking about Peyton Bowen if Caleb Downs was not just remarkable in every sense of the word. But Peyton Bowen can do so many different things. He is really, really good against the run, attacks downhill very fast, and is not afraid of contact at all. Can play a lot of really, really good coverage and doesn't necessarily need to quite as often because Billy Bowman's a little bit more of that mold. But at the end of the day, he is more than capable. Had 5 pass breakups last year, no picks, but at the end of the day, don't really need it if you're a big-time safety that is a really, really, really good and run support. So I think he's someone that is going to be a huge part of this Oklahoma team in 2024, but especially just going forward in the kind of Brent Venables era. Brent Venables has been really steadfast in the way that he is going to attack teams and attack this defense in general. The way he's kind of building this team and the way he's building this defense, he's always been hard-nosed. He's always been a little bit more intense and, a little bit more big-bodied guys and guys that aren't afraid of contact. And it took some time for him to get those right guys on campus, get those right guys in the Crimson and Cream, and allow them to kind of learn the way that he wants to do things. As we know, Lincoln Riley was leaving. It was not necessarily the most physical group that he was leaving behind. So that took some time to build up. But Peyton Bowen is honestly the exact guy that I think embodies what Brent Venables wants to do at Oklahoma and wants to kind of build there because he is mean. He plays fast, he plays aggressive, and he does everything that you'd want a safety to do. And with guys in the back end of that defense with him like Billy Bowman and Woody Washington, it gives him a lot more freedom to kind of be the athlete who he is, because with those two guys, they're going to hold it down. Woody Washington, obviously a very good corner, and then Billy Bowman, one of the most highly regarded safeties in the SEC this upcoming year. So Peyton Bowen, I think, is more talented than both of them. I think he's probably the best player of the bunch, and he has the most versatility, and you want to be able to use that. So having those two guys in the back end to be kind of the leaders and, hold down their positions very, very tightly, it gives Peyton Bowen the ability to be the athlete that he is and play the different positions he's able to play and be in coverage, be in run support, be wherever he needs to be, because he is as big of a player for that defense as really anyone on the entire roster. Another guy that is stepping into just huge shoes is Tony Rojas, the linebacker at Penn State. He only played in 8 games, only had 10 tackles, but his physical ability is just incredible. I think every single Nittany Lion fan, if you're watching right now, I'm sure you know this name. He is someone that has been really showing out, whether that's in practice or early spring or just last year, throughout the year. Definitely someone that Nittany Lion fans are very excited about. And one of the big things that happened this offseason for Penn State fans is Abdul Carter has made the move from linebacker to edge rusher. So he is taking over that edge rushing position mainly because you have Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac moving on to the NFL. Obviously, two huge holes to fill in that team, and Abdul Carter is the best athlete they have on that team. So they put him at the edge rusher role, but you need guys to step up at the linebacker position, and Rojas has just got to be one of those guys. Obviously, they have a couple other guys that are going to be huge. Kobe King is another one that is massive. He's going to probably be the middle linebacker this upcoming year. Might just be the guy with the headset, but I could see Tony Rojas being the guy with the headset depending on the way that he plays throughout the spring and how Tom Allen feels about him. Obviously, a new defensive coordinator, so everyone's kind of starting with a clean slate, and Tom Allen is going to kind of make a decision based off what he sees. So Tony Rojas could be someone that either, breaks into a massive role, becomes, the guy with the headset, the guy communicating everything to the entire defense, or he could be, sitting on the bench watching someone else do that, because this spring is going to be huge for him. It's going to be huge for pretty much everyone on that Penn State defense to prove who they are to the new guy in Tom Allen. So a lot of pressure on him, but he has plenty of guys around him like Abdul Carter and Kobe King to play off of and learn from, and I think he's someone that is going to absolutely burst onto the scene and maybe make some plays that'll make your jaw drop on Saturdays in the fall for sure. And then another guy that might be filling some of the biggest shoes in the entire country is Barrett Carter, the linebacker at Clemson. Obviously, Jeremiah Trotter has moved on to the next level. He was a huge part of that defense, was a big-time communicator, and Barrett Carter essentially just has to be that guy this year. Clemson has been great at producing linebacker talent. We talked about Sammy Brown earlier this week, I believe, when talking about this linebacker group. So it's plenty talented. You got Wade Woodaz, you have Kobe McLeod, and then obviously Sammy Brown, the freshman. There's huge amounts of depth. There's huge amounts of talent. But this is the head of the snake. This is the guy that is going to be leading the way. This is definitely the guy that is going to be the communicator for this team, have the headset in his ear talking to the defensive coordinator, and he's going to have to be huge. He's probably going to have to be one of, if not the emotional leader for this entire team, because that's kind of what linebackers at Clemson have been for a very long time. James Skalski was a huge part of that. Jeremiah Trotter was a huge part of that. So there have been guys in the past that have held a lot of weight at that position, and Barrett Carter is going to be no different, but he is absolutely up to the task. He's an absolute beast, is super athletic, is going to be one of the top linebackers in the game next year, in my opinion, and might just have a Butkus Award in his future if he plays the right way this upcoming year. Another guy that might be a little bit unknown, but honestly should be more well-known across the country is Jacob Parrish, a corner from Kansas State. This dude can absolutely play. He is a little bit undersized from what you would think when you watch him play, because he plays incredibly physical at the line of scrimmage, can play inside or outside, does a ton of really, really good things in coverage, was a all Big 12 honorable mention, 12 starts a year ago, had 37 tackles, 4 picks, and 9 pass breakups, so obviously is really, really good in coverage. Is one of those guys that you look on the field and you feel like you might have kind of a mismatch if you put a bigger receiver on him, but he can definitely hold his own. And with Kansas State this year, they are going to face some real dudes at wide receiver. There are some big-time names across the entire Big 12. Obviously, they don't have to play Arizona in the regular season, but there's a solid chance that they might find themselves in Dallas together. So Tatoric McMillan would be a huge part of that. Utah, the same way, could meet them in a big-time game to go to the playoff, and that would be Money Parks, or that would be Dorian Singer, or Texas Tech would be Micah Hudson, the incredible freshman that's coming in. So tons of guys that he is going to have to follow, that he is going to have to be the lockup cornerback for them this upcoming year, because if Kansas State doesn't have that guy on defense, if they don't have the absolute game changer on the outside, it could be a little bit of a disappointing year. I'm sure a lot of people around Manhattan are expecting a Big 12 championship. They're expecting to go to the playoff and at least be heard from in the playoff. And Jacob Parrish is as big a part of that as really anyone on the entire roster, because when you look at this defense, it's talented. It has plenty of players that can play. Chris Kleiman is going to put together a good defense. I have no doubt about that. But you need a game changer. Everyone, for the past, however many years, when you go into a national title game, they all have a game changer, and a lot of times it's at that corner position. For Georgia in 2021, obviously it was Keely Ringo with the huge plays. Will Johnson was absolutely massive for Michigan throughout the entirety of last year, so you need that guy on the outside, and Jacob Parrish could absolutely be that guy for Kansas State. And if he can really come into his own and, fulfill that remarkable potential he has, he could be one of the best players in the entire Big 12. And if that's the case, then Kansas State's going to be really, really hard to beat. And then finally, let's finish it off with a guy that really is kind of set up for a lot of success, I think, in 2024, in Kenneth Grant, the D lineman for Michigan. His chance is finally here. Obviously, the Michigan D-line has been pretty remarkable over the last couple of years, and guys have been in and out. There have been a ton of guys go to the next level. Mike Elston, the defensive line coach, has just moved on to join Jim Harbaugh at the Chargers, so there was some worry that some guys might find their way into the portal, but Kenneth Grant and obviously Mason Graham, another huge defensive lineman for them, are staying put in Ann Arbor. I apologize. But having Mason Graham right next to him is just going to be huge. You can't double team both those guys, so someone's going to have to get a single team, and it's going to be really, really hard to stop those guys when you have that. So Kenneth Grant is probably more of a run-stuffing type, likely will be off the field, I would think, on long third downs, but at the end of the day is a uber good athlete and is someone that can do a lot of different things. So it would not surprise me at all if he was an every down defensive lineman, but obviously that's a really, really hard thing to do, especially in your first year in big time snaps. But all of this obviously depends on how the new defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, plans to use him and plans to use pretty much the entire defense. A lot of guys have different philosophies with how many D linemen you want down, how many D linemen you want on the line at any given point. So it could be that Kenneth Grant is in kind of a rotation situation with Mason Graham. It could be that they're on the field at the same time. But at the end of the day, this guy has elite talent, has elite athleticism. So new D-line coach Jalen Scruggs is someone that has a ton to work with, but obviously has big shoes to fill. And if he's going to fill them, Kenneth Grant is going to be a huge part of that. But that will do it for breakout players for 2024. I have a feeling we will be revisiting that. I definitely have some more offensive guys that I've thought of since the last time I did that one, so we will definitely be back with that probably next week sometime. But we're going to take our final break here, and when we come back, we have a Hot Take Thursday, and it's about the coaching industry. So definitely stick with us, and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the breakout players on the defensive side of the ball for 2024, But now it's time for Hot Take Thursday, and this one I feel like people are starting to come around on. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I feel like people are starting to understand where some of us are coming from when we say this. First of all, I want to start with this is in no way Nick Saban's fault. Nick Saban has nothing to worry about in terms of how other coaches are viewed or how other coaches are expected to perform. He was just doing his job, and he happened to be the best we've ever seen at doing that job. So he's someone that set the bar insanely high, and it's created something of a trend in this sport where if certain guys, don't break through the first couple of times they're in the playoff or don't win a title in their first couple of years, they start getting unfair reputations. Let's put it that way. Saban's run with Bama was something I've never seen, obviously. It essentially took up my entire life. And it's something that a lot of us have never seen. It's something that we probably won't see at least soon ever again, or maybe, ever again. So it's something that we need to treat that way, right? Obviously, when we talk about other sports, this happens all the time. NFL quarterbacks should not be compared to Patrick Mahomes because Patrick Mahomes is insane, maybe one of the best to ever do it. So we shouldn't be comparing the average NFL quarterback to Patrick Mahomes because obviously he's not going to be nearly as good. Baseball players shouldn't be compared to Shohei Ohtani because not everyone can hit and pitch not everyone can do that in the same game. Not every soccer player should be compared to Messi or Ronaldo. I'm not going to get involved with that argument. Whichever one you like is the one that they shouldn't be compared to. So essentially, my point is we have tons of variability in every single sport, whether it's in the players or the coaches or the games or just the level of play. And the way that we should be judging the reality of the sport is by the mean of that sport or the mean of the player in that sport. So with NFL quarterbacks, whoever you want to say the mean is, I'm not necessarily going to get called into calling someone mid or calling someone not as good as everyone else. But in general, the way that we should disclose or the way that we should rank these people or show that who they are, I guess, in the grand scheme of things is not based off the best among us is the best way to put it. So I think there was this idea that Nick Saban was doing something that was totally replicable and everyone could do it and everyone was just too lazy or just didn't have the talent or whatever it is. It's insane that he was able to do what he did. It's insane that Kirby Smart was able to go back to back. That doesn't make much sense in the college world that we live in today. So it's wild what Nick Saban was able to do, and it should be treated that way, as an anomaly, as someone that is so far above what we thought was possible and what we thought, what everyone else was at the time. So it's very interesting to hear people talk about the current coaching landscape because when I hear Ryan Day's name or Brian Kelly's name, those have been the two biggest victims I've seen, at least recently, of this kind of mentality that we've kind of has permeated into the college football world. But when you look at active coaches, there's only 3 that have won titles: Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, and then Mac Brown. And I would argue that no one is putting Mac Brown on the same level of those other 2 guys. I don't think they're putting Mac Brown above Kalen DeBoer or Steve Sarkisian or Mike Norvell. The list could go on. Mac Brown is a fantastic coach and obviously etched his name into history in 2005 with Texas and Vince Young. But at the end of the day, winning a title doesn't necessarily automatically mean you are the best coach. The same way not winning a title doesn't necessarily mean you're not among the best coaches in the country. So this one is going to be, it's a little bit tough because I think there's a lot of people that would argue, if you're the elite of the elite and you've been there a number of times, like Lincoln Riley is a great example, been to the playoff, I believe 4 times, is 0-4 in those times that he's gone. And people immediately said, oh, so he can't win the big one. He's not capable of winning that game. He just doesn't have the chops or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, He's a play away in that Rose Bowl game against Georgia. Obviously, came out on the wrong side, but was very close to winning that game. Ran into an absolute buzzsaw in 2019 that we don't need to talk about in LSU. But the reality is this game is really, really hard. And winning a ton of games is really, really hard. The same way when people talk about Mike Norvell and Florida State last season, they say, well, you got taken to the woodshed in the Orange Bowl, so the entire year doesn't matter. Winning 13 games in a row, especially with some of the things they had to deal with, is remarkable, and it should be dealt with that way, and it shouldn't be just the final result defines the entire season, because that's a very dangerous proposition for every coach but the guy that wins the title. So I think there's this kind of mentality, especially surrounding Ryan Day, Brian Kelly, and Lincoln Riley, where they haven't done it, so people think they can't do it, or people think it's just not possible, they don't have the ability. Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and all of these people are just a cut above or whatever. And that's never really been the case. These guys have missed by inches a number of different times. Ryan Day obviously has been there a couple of different times, was in the title game one time, and things just didn't go his way. And a lot of this game has to do with a lot of things that honestly coaches can't really control, whether that's bounce of ball plays or, turnovers, penalties that they have no control over, certain things that they just can't fully control on game day. So these games are, decided by inches, they're decided by centimeters, really. And if we define all of these coaches by the greatest coach of all time, they're all not good. That's really the reality. Kirby Smart, even, a guy that's won back-to-back titles and was very close to trying to get a three-peat a year ago, is not great compared to Nick Saban, because Nick Saban has 7 of them, and he has beaten Kirby Smart a number of times on very big stages and has done incredible things. And Kirby Smart is the next incredible coach and could honestly develop a Saban-type legacy, a Alabama and Saban-type legacy at Georgia. But at the end of the day, it would be remarkable if he was able to pull that off. It's way more likely that he maybe wins one more, maybe he doesn't win any more, and he kind of just is a really good coach for the rest of his career but never breaks through again, because that's the reality of this sport. It's a lot about just what day you fall on and how your team is feeling and how they play on that specific day. So guys like Brian Kelly especially is at the very top of this game. He has had double-digit win seasons pretty much every year as he's been a head coach. He's been a big part of a lot of teams that have been to championships. I mean, the 2012 Notre Dame team is the obvious one that got taken to the woodshed by Alabama, but at the end of the day got there. Ryan Day, another one that has been in that game but just couldn't break through. Lincoln Riley, Kalen DeBoer, Steve Sarkisian, Mike Norvell, all of these guys are fantastic coaches. They have done incredible things at all of their programs. Obviously, Brian Kelly, Ryan Day, and Lincoln Riley have been doing it a little bit longer than the other 3 and have a little bit more under their belt, but all of those guys are remarkable coaches, and if you put their resume up against Nick Saban, it looks like nothingness, right? It looks like they don't know how to coach, or they aren't remotely on the same level, and it's because they aren't. So it's kind of just this overarching thought in college football that you hire a coach, and if in 3 years it doesn't look the way you want it to look, you kick him to the curb and you start back over. I've seen that, a number of times. I have been a Texas fan for a majority of my life, and the majority of my life was involved in flipping over coaches very often, and, the Charlie Strong to Tom Herman to Steve Sarkisian. So there's been a lot of that kind of mentality and that kind of thought process, and not that you shouldn't, judge these coaches early on in their tenure. Not that these coaches are, totally scot-free for the first 3 or 4 years of their contract by any means, but we have to give guys a chance to build what they want to build. Building a program is incredibly hard. We saw what Steve Sarkisian inherited at Texas. We saw what Mario Cristobal inherited at Miami, and the real rebuild process is really hard to pull off. It's really hard from a personnel standpoint. It's hard from a staff standpoint. And especially with all of the different things happening in college football, it's incredibly hard. So all of these coaches have done remarkable things, and yeah, they don't have the trophy on the shelf. They don't have the national title on the shelf. They don't necessarily have the big-time thing that they've all been looking for. But at the end of the day, one of the big-time hurdles for that, Nick Saban has gotten out of the way. The two guys that have gotten to multiple titles during this time are Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. I had them 1 and 2 in my coaches rankings for that reason, because winning titles during this era has been something that is not easy to do remotely, and those guys in particular had to go through Saban to do it in a lot of instances. So I think those guys obviously deserve the utmost respect and are at the very top of this sport. But the second group is still a remarkable group of coaches and a remarkable group of developers and decision makers and do incredible things. But there's been an Achilles heel, and as we all have seen, a lot of the time, it's been the defensive side of the ball. Last year, Brian Kelly had Jaden Daniels on his team. He was one of the most electric players in the country. The Heisman winner did incredible things, and likely if they had a defense that was even top 50, they're probably in the playoff. They're probably at least giving themselves a shot at a national title. But bad defense got in their way. Lincoln Riley, bad defense got in his way pretty much every which way from Tuesday while he was at OU and even in 2022 at USC. So all of these guys, Ryan Day, same thing. Some of these bad defenses have gotten his way. In that Ohio State-Georgia game that was such a classic a couple of years ago, that defense got torched in the fourth quarter, let's be honest. Stetson Bennett essentially completed every single pass he had. But all of those guys are trying to fix that problem. All of those guys have taken big-time strides. Hiring a new DC has been the biggest thing that Ohio State has done. Hiring Jim Knowles has been a huge thing for their program, and I think will continue to be. Hiring Blake Baker at LSU for Brian Kelly is a huge hire that I think will change the direction of his program. DeAnton Lynn being hired at USC from UCLA, another big-time hire, and Lincoln Riley is really under it because he has a entire culture really to flip over there at USC, because there's a certain level of toughness that they need to be playing with that they're not playing with right now. So my point is, in all of this, I know that was a little bit rambling and kind of all over the place. I apologize for that, but the reality is, when these guys get hired and they say they want to win titles and they say they want to do X, Y, and Z and do remarkable things at your school, and it takes them some time, just be a little bit more patient. Be a little bit more realistic about where your school stands, where your roster stands, and especially remind yourself that this guy is not Nick Saban. This guy is not, the best coach of all time, and maybe he is. Maybe he'll end up being Nick Saban, but even Nick Saban took until I think year 6 or 7 of being a head coach to win that first title. So these things take time. All of this development as a coach takes incredible amounts of time, but building a program even takes time. Building out a roster takes time. So essentially just give them a little bit of chance to breathe. Give them expectations that make sense for the short term. Miami is a huge problem area for this. People saying Mario Cristobal has fallen on his face when in reality he's probably right on schedule with what he had planned, but that's a topic for another time. I think allowing these coaches to execute what they want without this massive weight on their shoulders that they might get fired if they don't deliver by year 2 or year 3 is something that will open the door for so many great coaches to realize their full potential and be the incredible coaches that they're capable of being. But right now there are a lot of worried faces, I'm sure, across pretty much every football program, because this is a pretty cutthroat business. And I think if we just allowed them a little bit more grace, then you would see a lot more coaches be successful, a lot more programs be happy that they waited, and possibly a lot more players not bouncing around as much because there isn't this crazy coaching carousel every 2 seconds of every day. So it's a very interesting concept. Obviously, we've saw Nick Saban's essentially his death march through college football over the last decade or so, and it's over now. So can we just look at again the expectations that we have for coaches going forward? And now that he's out of the room, can we just regroup, understand that not every coach is Nick Saban, and move forward from there? But that will do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. It means a whole lot to us. And then we also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram for all of the content and updates. Obviously, this time is March Madness time, so my guy Nelson over on the basketball podcast will get you taken care of there. But tons of people covering every single sport you could think of, so definitely follow on all of the pages there. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow with a very special guest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.